At Thanksgiving dinner, my grandson smiled and said, "Enjoying the beach house I made Daddy give you?" "Love you, Grandma." I simply replied, "What house? I live in a rental, sweetheart." That's when my gold digger daughter-in-law choked on her food. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have known something was off the moment I walked into Abram's house that Thursday afternoon. The smell of turkey and stuffing filled the air, but there was something else lurking beneath the surface, a tension I couldn't quite place. Gaia greeted me at the door with her usual practiced smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. "Joyceann, you made it," she exclaimed, giving me one of those hollow hugs that felt more like a performance than genuine affection. "Byron has been asking about you all morning. At 64, I'd learned to read people pretty well, but Gaia had always been a puzzle I couldn't solve. She'd been part of our family for 12 years now, ever since she married my son Abram, but I still felt like I was watching a carefully rehearsed act whenever she was around. "Where's my grandson?" I asked, setting down the cranberry sauce I'd brought, homemade the way my mother used to make it. "He's in the living room with Daddy, probably trying to sneak peeks at the football game," Gaia laughed, but her eyes kept darting toward the kitchen. "Why don't you go say hello while I finish up in here?" I made my way through their spacious home, noting the new furniture, the expensive artwork on the walls, the crystal chandelier that definitely wasn't there last Christmas. Abram worked as a mid-level manager at an insurance company. Good money, but not enough for all this luxury. I'd been helping them out financially for years, small amounts here and there when they claimed to be struggling, but looking around now, I wondered where all that money had really gone. "Grandma Joy!" Byron's voice cut through my thoughts as he launched himself into my arms. At 8 years old, he was all energy and excitement, the one bright spot in these increasingly awkward family gatherings. "There's my favorite grandson," I said, even though he was my only grandson. It was our little joke. "I'm your only grandson, Grandma," he giggled, right on cue. Abram stood up from his recliner, muting the television. "Hey, Mom, thanks for coming." There was something strained in his voice, but before I could analyze it further, Gaia called us all to the dining room. The table was set with fine china, another new addition, and everything looked perfect. Too perfect, actually. It reminded me of those magazine spreads where everything is beautiful but nothing feels lived in. We sat down, and Abram said a brief grace. I watched my family during the prayer, noting how Gaia kept checking her phone, how Abram's hands trembled slightly as he spoke, how Byron squirmed in his chair like he had something important to say. The conversation started normally enough. Byron told me about school, about his new teacher, about the soccer team he'd joined. Gaia asked about my health with that concerned tone that sounded rehearsed. Abram mostly stayed quiet, cutting his turkey into precise, small pieces. Then, about halfway through dinner, Byron looked up at me with those bright eyes and said the words that would change everything. "Grandma Joy, are you enjoying the beach house that I made Daddy give you?" The fork in my hand stopped halfway to my mouth. I felt the blood drain from my face as I processed what he'd just said. Beach house? What beach house? I lived in a 2-bedroom rental apartment across town, had been living there for the past 8 years since I'd downsized after your grandfather died. "What beach house, sweetheart?" I asked carefully, setting down my fork. Byron's face lit up with excitement. "The one by the ocean. Mommy said you always wanted one, so Daddy bought it for you, and now you get to go there whenever you want." I felt like the room was spinning. Across the table, Gaia had gone completely still, her face pale as milk. She was staring at Byron with an expression I'd never seen before, pure panic. "Byron, honey," Gaia said quickly, her voice higher than usual, "why don't you tell Grandma about your art project instead?" But Byron was on a roll now, oblivious to the tension crackling around the table. "It's so cool, Grandma. Mommy showed me pictures. It has a big deck and you can see the water from the windows, and there's even a place to park a boat." I looked directly at Gaia, whose hands were now shaking as she reached for her water glass. "That sounds lovely, Byron, but I think there might be some confusion. I don't have a beach house." "Yes, you do," Byron insisted with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "Daddy bought it for you because you're old and you needed somewhere nice to live." The words hit me like a physical blow. Old. somewhere nice to live. I glanced at my small rental apartment keys sitting next to my purse and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Abram finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Byron, that's enough. But Daddy, I said that's enough. Abram's tone was sharp now, and Byron's face fell. He looked confused, like he'd done something wrong but didn't understand what. Gaia attempted a laugh, but it came out hollow and forced. Kids and their imagination, right? He must have seen something on TV and gotten confused. But I was looking at my son now, really looking at him, and I could see the guilt written all over his face. His eyes wouldn't meet mine, and his hands had gone completely still on his napkin. Abram, I said quietly, what is your son talking about? The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Byron looked back and forth between his parents, sensing something was wrong, but not understanding what. Gaia was practically vibrating with nervous energy, and Abram looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Finally, Gaia forced another laugh and stood up abruptly. You know what? I think I burned the pie. Let me go check on dessert. She practically fled to the kitchen, and I could hear cabinet doors slamming, dishes rattling. She was falling apart, and we all knew it. I kept my eyes on Abram. Son, I think you and I need to have a conversation. Byron, bless him, was still trying to help. It's okay, Grandma. Even if you forgot about your beach house, Mommy says it's still yours. She says you gave it to us to take care of for you because you're too old to remember important stuff. The words landed like bombs around the dinner table. Too old to remember. Gave it to them. I felt my chest tighten with a mixture of hurt and growing anger. Abram closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, I saw my little boy, the one who used to come to me when he'd broken something, knowing I'd help him fix it. But this wasn't a broken toy or a scraped knee. This was something much, much bigger. Mom, he said softly, we need to talk. The conversation I'd been dreading happened 2 days after Thanksgiving. Abram called me Saturday morning, his voice heavy with something I couldn't identify. Shame, maybe, or fear. Mom, can I come over? We should talk about what Byron said. I'd barely slept since Thursday. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my grandson's innocent voice asking about a beach house that didn't exist, talking about how I was too old to remember important stuff. The words had been playing on repeat in my mind, each repetition making me feel smaller and more confused. Yes, I said simply. Come over. He arrived an hour later, alone. I noticed that immediately. No Gaia, no Byron. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept either. His usually neat hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 36 years. I made coffee the way I always did, in the old percolator that had been a wedding gift 42 years ago. The familiar routine helped calm my nerves, gave my hands something to do while my mind raced with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where he'd done homework as a child, where we'd had countless conversations over the years. But this felt different. There was a wall between us now, built from secrets and lies I was only beginning to understand. Mom, he started, then stopped. He stared into his coffee cup like it might provide him with the right words. Just tell me the truth, Abram, I said quietly. Whatever it is, just tell me. He took a shaky breath. There's no beach house. Even though I'd known it, hearing him say it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. I figured as much. So why does Byron think there is one? Abram's hands trembled as he set down his coffee cup. Because Gaia told him there was. She's been telling him for months that we bought you a beach house, that you're living there now, happy and comfortable. But why would she? I stopped. A cold realization was creeping up my spine. The money, Abram. All the money I've been giving you over the years. He couldn't look at me. Gaia said it would be easier if Byron thought we were helping you instead of the other way around. She said it would be confusing for a kid to understand why his grandmother was always giving us money. So you let her lie to him. It started small, he said desperately, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Just little things. When you helped us with the down payment on the house, She told Byron we'd bought you a condo. When you gave us money for his daycare, she said it was because we were paying for your groceries. I felt sick. And the beach house? That was recent. You've been so generous with us, especially this past year. And Gaia thought Byron was starting to ask too many questions about why Grandma was always giving us money. So she told him we'd bought you this amazing beach house where you could relax and enjoy your retirement. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. Here I was, living in a cramped rental apartment, clipping coupons and stretching my Social Security check to help them out, while my own grandson thought I was living in luxury by the ocean. "How much money are we talking about, Abram?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Finally, he whispered, "About $60,000 over the past 3 years. $60,000. My entire savings account gone. Money I'd set aside for emergencies, for medical bills, for the possibility that I might need assisted living someday. I'd given it all to them, believing their stories about struggling to make ends meet, about Byron needing this or that, about unexpected expenses and temporary setbacks. I kept track," I said numbly. "Every check I wrote you, every transfer. I told myself it was temporary, that you'd pay me back when things got better." "We wanted to pay you back," Abram said quickly. "We always intended to, but things never got better, did they?" I interrupted. "There was always another emergency, another crisis. Byron needed soccer cleats, the car needed repairs, the furnace broke down." "Some of those things were real," he protested weakly, "and some weren't. It wasn't a question." His silence was answer enough. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the small courtyard of my apartment complex. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door was hanging laundry on her balcony, and the Martinez kids were riding bikes in circles around the parking lot. It was a modest place, but it was clean and safe, and it was all I could afford. "The new furniture in your house," I said without turning around. "The crystal chandelier, the fancy china we ate off on Thursday. That was my money too, wasn't it? Gaia said we needed to look successful for my job, for networking." "Stop." I turned back to face him. "Stop making excuses for her and start taking responsibility for what you've done." Abram's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. It got out of hand, and I didn't know how to stop it." "You could have stopped it by telling the truth. You could have stopped it by standing up to your wife when she asked you to lie to your own mother. She said it was temporary," he whispered. "She said once I got promoted, once we got on our feet, we'd tell you the truth and pay you back with interest." I sat back down, feeling every one of my 64 years weighing on my shoulders. "And in the meantime, you let your son believe his grandmother was living in luxury while you took money from her Social Security check. We never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, Abram. And now Byron thinks I'm some wealthy woman who gave you a beach house out of the goodness of my heart, while I'm sitting here trying to figure out how I'm going to afford my rent increase next month." The weight of it all was crushing. Not just the money, though, that was devastating enough. It was the betrayal, the systematic deception, the way they'd turned my love for them into a weapon against me. "Does Gaia feel bad about any of this?" I asked. Abram was quiet for a long moment. "She says you have more than you need. She says Social Security is free money anyway, and that family should help family." "Free money," I repeated slowly. "Social Security is free money." "I don't agree with her," he said quickly. "I never agreed with her about that. But you went along with it anyway." He nodded miserably. "I went along with it anyway." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, who I'd thought I knew, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Somewhere along the way, he'd become someone I didn't recognize, someone who could lie to his own mother and sleep at night. "I need you to leave now," I said quietly. "Mom, please, let me make this right. Let me figure out how to pay you back." "How, Abram? You just told me you've spent $60,000 of my money on furniture and lies. How exactly are you going to make that right?" He had no answer because there wasn't one. The money was gone, and so was my trust. "I need time to think," I said. "I need you to go home and figure out how you're going to explain to your wife that the gravy train has stopped. And I need you to think about how you're going to explain to Byron why Grandma doesn't actually live in a beach house." Abram stood slowly, like an old man. "What are you going to do?" I looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know yet. but I can promise you this. I'm not going to pretend anymore that everything is fine when it's not. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to process what had just happened. $60,000. 3 years of lies. A grandson who thought I was wealthy while I struggled to make ends meet. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. The days following my conversation with Abram felt like walking through a minefield of memories. Every time I thought I had a handle on what had happened, another piece of the puzzle would surface, making me question everything I'd believed about my family for the past 3 years. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I kept replaying conversations in my head, seeing them now with different eyes. The phone calls that always came at the end of the month when bills were due. The way Gaia's voice would get soft and worried when she talked about Byron needing something. The elaborate stories about unexpected expenses that always seemed to happen right when I'd gotten my Social Security deposit. It was Tuesday morning when I finally forced myself to go through my bank statements. I spread them across my kitchen table like evidence in a crime scene, which in a way they were. 3 years' worth of transfers, checks, and withdrawals, each one representing a moment when I'd chosen to trust my family over my own financial security. The first entry that caught my eye was from 18 months ago, $2,500 transferred to Abram's account. I remembered that call perfectly now. Gaia had been crying on the phone, saying Byron had fallen off his bike and needed emergency dental work. Their insurance wouldn't cover it all, she'd said, and they didn't have the money. Could I help just this once? I'd rushed to the bank that same day, my heart breaking for my grandson. Now I wondered if Byron had even fallen off his bike, or if it was just another story crafted to pull at my heartstrings and open my wallet. Then there was the $3,000 from last Christmas. Gaia had called in tears again. This was becoming a pattern I was just now recognizing, saying the furnace had died and they needed it fixed immediately, or Byron would get sick. It was December in Michigan, and the thought of my grandson being cold was unbearable. I'd transferred the money within an hour, but as I sat there looking at the evidence, I remembered visiting them just 2 weeks after that emergency. The house had been perfectly warm, but what I'd noticed was the new leather sectional in the living room and the expensive-looking coffee table. When I'd complimented them on the furniture, Gaia had quickly said they'd gotten a great deal from a friend who was moving. Every entry told a similar story. September, $1,800 for emergency car repairs after Abram's transmission supposedly went out. October, $2,200 for Byron's medical bills after he allegedly had an allergic reaction. November, $1,500 for school expenses because Byron needed a tutor to keep up with his advanced classes. I called the school on Wednesday. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Joyceann Holloway, Byron Peterson's grandmother," I said to the secretary. "I was wondering if you could tell me about the tutoring program he's been enrolled in this semester." There was a pause. "Tutoring program? Ma'am, Byron is one of our top students. He's never needed tutoring. In fact, his teacher just recommended him for the gifted and talented program." My hand tightened on the phone. "Are you sure? His parents said he was struggling and needed extra help." "Oh no, ma'am. Byron is doing exceptionally well. He's reading above grade level, and his math scores are excellent. There's definitely been some kind of misunderstanding." I hung up feeling sick to my stomach. Even Byron's academic achievements had been twisted into a reason to ask for money. I wondered what else they'd lied about. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to Abram's neighborhood and parked across the street from his house. I felt like a stalker, but I needed to see with my own eyes what my money had really bought. The house was beautiful. There was no denying that. 2 stories. Well-maintained, with a perfectly manicured lawn and flower beds that obviously received professional care. The driveway held 2 cars, Abram's practical sedan and Gaia's brand-new SUV that I now realized I'd probably helped pay for. I watched as Gaia came out to get the mail, dressed in what looked like expensive workout clothes. Her hair was perfectly styled, her nails freshly manicured. This was not a woman who was struggling financially. This was a woman who was living very well, partly on my dime. As I sat there, more memories surfaced. The way Gaia always had a new handbag when I visited, the designer clothes Byron wore to family gatherings, the organic groceries that filled their pantry, the premium cable package that gave them hundreds of channels, the landscaping service I'd seen working on their yard. All of it paid for with my Social Security money, while I bought generic brands at the grocery store and wore the same 3 dresses to church every Sunday. But it wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the elaborate nature of the deception. These weren't spur-of-the-moment lies told to cover up small mistakes. These were carefully crafted stories, designed to manipulate my emotions and extract maximum sympathy and maximum cash. I remembered last spring when Gaia had called sobbing because Byron's class was taking a field trip to Washington, D.C., and they couldn't afford to send him. All his friends were going, she'd said, and he would be devastated to be left behind. The trip cost $800, and she'd made it sound like it was the most important thing in Byron's young life. I'd sent the money immediately, imagining my grandson's excitement about seeing the Capitol and the Smithsonian. Now I wondered if there had ever been a field trip at all, or if that $800 had gone toward their spring vacation to Myrtle Beach, the one they'd posted pictures of on social media while telling me they couldn't afford to visit. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how sophisticated their system had become. Gaia was always the one to call, always crying, always desperate. Abram would stay in the background, the reluctant husband who didn't want to ask for help, but was forced to by circumstances beyond his control. Together, they'd created this narrative where they were hardworking people who'd fallen on temporary hard times, and I was the generous grandmother who could afford to help, and I'd fallen for it completely. The worst part was realizing how they'd used Byron as their secret weapon. Every request for money somehow involved my grandson's well-being. It was never about Gaia wanting a new purse or Abram wanting a bigger TV. It was always about Byron needing something essential: medical care, educational support, basic necessities. They'd weaponized my love for that little boy, knowing I would never let him suffer if I could prevent it. They'd counted on my devotion to my only grandchild, my desire to be a good grandmother, my fear that saying no would somehow harm him. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I'd never experienced before, a deep, bone-deep anger that went beyond hurt or betrayal. This wasn't just about lying or even about stealing money. This was about the systematic manipulation of a grandmother's love, the calculated exploitation of family bonds, the deliberate deception of an innocent child who now believed his grandmother was wealthy enough to own beachfront property. But there was something else growing alongside the anger, a cold, clear determination. They'd played a game with me thinking I was too old, too trusting, too dependent on their love to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Thursday night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began making a list. Not a list of what they owed me, that was beyond recovery. A list of what I was going to do next. For 3 years, I'd been reacting to their crises, responding to their emergencies, dancing to their tune. That was about to change. It was time for me to take control of the game. I spent Friday morning rehearsing what I was going to say. Standing in front of my bathroom mirror, I practiced keeping my voice steady, my expression calm. I'd learned a long time ago that the quieter you speak, the more people have to listen. And I wanted Gaia to hear every single word. I called her around noon. "Joyceann." Her voice was bright, artificial. "How are you, honey? Abram told me you two had a nice chat the other day." A nice chat. That's what she was calling the conversation where her husband admitted to stealing $60,000 from his mother. "Gaia, I think we need to talk. Just you and me." There was a pause. I could practically hear her brain working, calculating. "Oh, of course. Is everything okay? You sound a little stressed." "I'm fine. Can you meet me at Riverside Park? At the pavilion by the duck pond, 1 o'clock. "Well, She was stalling, looking for an excuse. "I have so much to do today, and Byron gets home from school at 3:30. "This won't take long," I said firmly. 1 o'clock, Gaia. Don't bring Byron." I hung up before she could argue. Riverside Park was where I used to take Abram when he was little. We'd feed the ducks and play on the swings, and I'd push his stroller around the walking path while he napped in the afternoon sun. It seemed fitting somehow to have this conversation in a place that held so many memories of who my son used to be before Gaia changed him. I arrived early and chose a picnic table that gave me a clear view of the parking lot. I wanted to see her coming, wanted to watch her body language as she approached. I'd been studying Gaia for 3 years without realizing it, and now I was finally ready to use what I'd learned. She pulled up in her shiny SUV at exactly 1 o'clock, the one I now knew I'd helped finance. She sat in the driver's seat for a full minute before getting out, and I could see her checking her makeup in the rearview mirror, composing herself for whatever performance she was about to give. Gaia approached the table with her usual confident stride, but I noticed the way her hands fluttered nervously at her sides, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Joyceann, you had me worried with that mysterious phone call," she said, settling across from me at the picnic table. "What's this all about?" I studied her for a moment. Even now, even knowing what I knew, she was still playing the role of the concerned daughter-in-law, the devoted wife and mother who just wanted everyone to be happy. "Tell me about the beach house, Gaia." Her smile faltered for just a split second before snapping back into place. "The beach house? Oh, you mean Byron's little story from Thanksgiving. Kids have such imaginations, don't they? Do they?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a screenshot I'd taken of her Facebook page from 6 months ago. In the photo, she was wearing a new dress, standing in front of what looked like an expensive restaurant. The caption read, "Date night. Celebrating another successful month of taking care of family. So grateful for all our blessings." "I don't understand what you're showing me," she said, but her voice had gotten higher. "This was posted the same week you called me crying about needing money for Byron's emergency dental work. The same week you told me you couldn't afford groceries." I put the phone away and folded my hands on the table. "You look pretty blessed for someone who was supposed to be struggling." Gaia's mask was starting to slip. The smile became more forced, and I could see tension creeping into her shoulders. "Joyceann, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "No," I said quietly. "There's been a lie. A very deliberate, very calculated lie that you've been telling for 3 years. I don't know what Abram told you." "Abram told me the truth, finally." I leaned forward slightly. "He told me about the $60,000. He told me about the stories you made up to get that money. And he told me about the beach house you invented to explain to Byron why his grandmother keeps giving his parents cash." The color drained from Gaia's face, but she wasn't ready to give up yet. She never was. "Okay, yes, maybe I've embellished some things. But Joyceann, you have to understand. We were really struggling for a while there, and I didn't want Byron to worry." "Stop lying to me." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, and Gaia actually flinched. "I called Byron's school. There was no tutoring. I checked with your insurance company. Byron never had an allergic reaction that required emergency treatment. I even called the heating and cooling company that supposedly fixed your furnace. They have no record of any service call to your address." Gaia stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You investigated us?" "I verified what you told me. There's a difference." For a long moment, we sat in silence. A family was feeding ducks nearby, their children laughing as the birds flapped and splashed in the water. It was such a normal, innocent scene, so different from the confrontation happening at our table. Finally, Gaia's shoulders sagged, and something shifted in her expression. The mask didn't just slip, it fell away completely. "Fine," she said, and her voice was different now, colder. "You want the truth? Here's the truth. Yes, I made up some of those emergencies. Yes, I exaggerated some of the problems, but everything I did was for this family. Everything you did was for yourself." "That's not true." Her voice rose, and the family with the ducks looked over. She forced herself to speak more quietly. "Do you know how hard it is to raise a child on what Abram makes? Do you know how expensive everything is? The mortgage, the car payments, Byron's activities, his clothes, his school supplies. So, you decided to steal from his grandmother instead of adjusting your lifestyle." "It's not stealing if it's family." The words burst out of her like she'd been holding them back for a long time. "You live alone in a tiny apartment. You don't have a car payment or a mortgage or a child to support. That Social Security money just sits in your account doing nothing." There it was, the real Gaia, the one who'd been hiding behind tears and sob stories for 3 years, the one who thought my Social Security was free money that I didn't deserve to keep. "That Social Security money is my retirement, Gaia. It's what I live on. It's what's supposed to take care of me when I'm too old to work." "But you're fine," she said, gesturing dismissively. You're healthy. You can take care of yourself. We needed that money for Byron's future. By lying to him about where it came from, I told him his grandmother was generous and successful because I wanted him to be proud of you. What's wrong with that? I stared at her, finally understanding the depth of her delusion. In her mind, she'd actually done me a favor by creating this elaborate fiction. She'd made me look good to my grandson while solving her own financial problems. It was a win-win situation, as far as she was concerned. What's wrong with it, Gaia? Is that it's not true. I'm not successful. I'm not wealthy. I've been living paycheck to paycheck while giving you money I couldn't afford to give. Well, maybe you should have said something sooner, she snapped. Nobody forced you to help us. You're right, I said calmly. Nobody forced me. I chose to help because I love my son and my grandson. I chose to believe the stories you told me because I trusted my family, but that ends now. Gaia's eyes narrowed. What do you mean it ends now? I mean the Bank of Joyceann is permanently closed. No more emergencies, no more sob stories, no more money. You can't do that, she said, and there was something desperate in her voice now. We depend on that help. Byron depends on it. Byron depends on his parents to support him, not his grandmother. And if you can't support him on Abram's salary, maybe you need to get a job. I have a job. I take care of Byron and the house. That's not a job, Gaia. That's being a parent. Millions of women manage to be mothers and work outside the home. She leaned back as if I'd slapped her. I can't believe you're being so cruel. After everything we've been through as a family. Everything we've been through? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Gaia, we've never been through anything together. You've been lying to me for 3 years. You've stolen my money, manipulated my emotions, and turned my own grandson into an unwitting accomplice in your schemes. Don't you dare bring Byron into this, she hissed. He loves you. I know he does. And I love him. Which is why I'm not going to let you continue using him as bait to hook money out of me. Gaia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the concrete. This isn't over, Joyceann. Abram won't let you cut us off completely. He's your son. Yes, he is. And that's the only reason I'm giving you this warning instead of calling the police. The police? She laughed, but it sounded shrill. For what? Taking money you gave us voluntarily? For fraud. For obtaining money under false pretenses. For theft by deception. I stood up too, meeting her eyes. I may be 64 years old, Gaia, but I'm not stupid. And I'm done being your victim. I turned and walked toward my car, leaving her standing by the picnic table. Behind me, I could hear her calling my name, her voice getting shriller with each repetition. But I didn't turn around. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was the one in control. The phone started ringing that very evening. Not my landline. Gaia wasn't stupid enough to think I'd answer that. But my cell phone, which I'd foolishly given Abram in case of emergencies. Now every unknown number felt like an invasion. I let them all go to voicemail. The first message was from Abram, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Mom, Gaia told me what happened at the park. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can we please talk? Please call me back. The second was from Gaia herself, all traces of her earlier anger replaced by syrupy sweetness. Joyceann, honey, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I may have said some things that came out wrong. I was just stressed about money. You know how that is. Can we start over? I deleted them both without listening to the rest. Saturday morning brought a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I could see Abram standing in the hallway, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he used to do as a child when he was in trouble. I almost didn't answer, but something about the slump of his shoulders made me reconsider. Mom, he said when I opened the door. Please, can I come in? He looked terrible. His hair was unwashed, his clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. There were deep circles under his eyes that made him look older than his years. Is Gaia with you? No. She's at her sister's with Byron. He paused. She thought it would be better if we talked alone. I stepped aside to let him in, but I didn't offer coffee or ask him to sit down. This wasn't a social visit, and I wasn't going to pretend it was. She told me what you said yesterday, he began, standing awkwardly in my living room, about calling the police. I meant every word. Mom, You can't seriously be thinking about pressing charges against your own family. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing my son's face. When had he become someone who thought family status exempted him from consequences? When had he started believing that blood relation was a license to steal? Abram, do you remember when you were 12 and you took $20 from my purse to buy Pokemon cards? He blinked, thrown by the change of subject. Yes? What did I do when I found out? You made me return the cards and apologize to the store manager, he said quietly. And you made me do extra chores for a month to earn the money back. Why? Because stealing is wrong, even if it's from family. Even if you really want something, the words came out automatically, like a lesson learned long ago. So what's changed, son? He stared at me, and I could see the exact moment he understood what I was asking. His face crumpled, and for a second he looked like that 12-year-old boy again, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he whispered. It started small. Just a little help here and there. Gaia said we'd pay you back as soon as I got promoted. But you never got promoted, did you? No. The company's been cutting back, not expanding. And the bills kept coming, and Byron kept growing out of his clothes, and the house needed repairs. He trailed off, running his hands through his hair. I know how it sounds. I know what we did was wrong. Do you? I asked. Because yesterday, Gaia told me I should have spoken up sooner if I couldn't afford to help. She acted like this was somehow my fault for being too generous. Abram winced. She didn't mean it like that. Yes, she did. And the fact that you're still making excuses for her tells me everything I need to know about where your loyalties lie. That's not fair, Mom. She's my wife. We're supposed to present a united front. Even when she's stealing from your mother? We never saw it as stealing, he protested. You were helping us, and we were grateful. Stop. I held up a hand. Just stop. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was some kind of family assistance program. You lied to me, Abram. Repeatedly, systematically. You created fake emergencies to manipulate me into giving you money I couldn't afford to give. We were desperate. So was I. The words exploded out of me with more force than I'd intended. Do you think I was living it up while you were struggling? Do you think I was rolling in money and just being stingy? I've been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so I could help you pay for Byron's soccer cleats. I've been walking to the grocery store because I couldn't afford gas after writing you another check. Abram's face went white. Mom, I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. It was easier to believe your mother was some wealthy widow who could afford to bankroll your lifestyle than to face the reality that you were taking food out of my mouth. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Mrs. Rodriguez's television through the thin walls, the sound of children playing in the courtyard below. Normal life going on while my world fell apart. What do you want me to do? Abram asked finally. I want you to be honest with your son. I want you to tell Byron the truth about where all that money came from. I want you to explain to him that Grandma doesn't have a beach house, that she's been sacrificing her own security to help his family. That'll confuse him. He's just a kid. He's old enough to understand the difference between truth and lies. And he's old enough to learn that actions have consequences. And then what? You never speak to us again. You cut Byron out of your life because of what we did? That was the question I'd been dreading, the one that had kept me awake every night since Thanksgiving. How do you punish the guilty without hurting the innocent? How do you protect yourself without losing the grandchild you love more than life itself? I'll always love Byron, I said carefully. But I won't continue to enable this dysfunction. I won't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. So, what does that mean, practically speaking? I took a deep breath. This was the part I'd rehearsed, the decision I'd come to after days of painful soul-searching. It means no more money. Not for emergencies, not for extras, not for anything. You're a grown man with a job and a family. Figure out how to live within your means. And Byron? I want to see Byron, but not at your house, and not with Gaia present. Once a month, you can bring him here for an afternoon. Just him. We can go to the park or the library or the zoo. But I won't sit through any more family dinners where I'm treated like an ATM. Abram's jaw tightened. Gaia won't like that arrangement. I don't care what Gaia likes. This isn't about her anymore. She's my wife, Mom. She's Byron's mother. You can't just exclude her from everything. Watch me. We stared at each other across my small living room, and I could see him weighing his options. His mother or his wife, his integrity or his comfortable life, his family's respect or their continued financial support. I need to think about this, he said finally. No, you don't. You need to choose. Right here, right now. Are you going to continue enabling Gaia's manipulation and lies? Or are you going to stand up and be the man I raised you to be? It's not that simple. Yes, it is. It's exactly that simple. Either you support your wife's theft and deception, or you don't. Either you believe I deserve to be treated with honesty and respect, or you don't. Abram stood there for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides. I could see the war going on behind his eyes, the struggle between what he knew was right and what was easiest. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. I can't choose between my mother and my wife. You already did, son. 3 years ago, when you decided her wants were more important than my well-being. You just didn't have the courage to admit it until now. He flinched like I'd struck him. That's not, I never meant. But you did. Every time you lied to me, every time you cashed one of my checks knowing it was based on a fabricated emergency, every time you let Gaia spin another sob story, you chose her over me. So that's it? You're cutting me off completely? I walked to the door and opened it. I'm protecting myself, Abram. Something I should have done a long time ago. He stood there for another moment, looking like he wanted to say something else, but whatever words he was searching for never came. Finally, he walked past me and out into the hallway. I love you, Mom, he said without turning around. I love you too, I replied. That's why this hurts so much. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness. The pain was still too fresh for that. But peace. The kind that comes from finally stopping a fight you never should have been fighting in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw a photo of Byron at what looked like a skating rink, grinning and giving a thumbs up. Below the picture was a message from Gaia. Byron's skating lessons are $200 a month, just so you know what you're taking away from him. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I blocked the number and deleted the photo. The manipulation wasn't over, but my participation in it was. 6 months later, I was standing in the checkout line at the grocery store when I saw her. Gaia was 3 lanes over, her cart piled high with generic brands and store coupons clutched in her hand. Gone were the designer workout clothes and the perfectly styled hair. She looked tired, stressed, and completely ordinary. She hadn't seen me yet, too focused on counting and recounting the items in her cart, clearly calculating whether she had enough money to pay for everything. I watched as she put back a box of expensive cereal and replaced it with a cheaper alternative. For a split second, I felt a twinge of something that might have been guilt. Then I remembered the beach house story, the fake emergencies, the systematic deception that had nearly emptied my savings account, and the feeling passed. I paid for my groceries, real groceries, including fresh vegetables and meat I could finally afford again, and headed home to my apartment. The same apartment I'd been worried about losing 6 months ago when the rent increase notice came. The same apartment that now felt like a sanctuary instead of a prison. My life had changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. Without the constant drain of supporting Abram and Gaia's lifestyle, my Social Security check actually covered my expenses with money left over. I'd been able to build up a small emergency fund again, something I hadn't had in years. More importantly, I'd been able to build up my self-respect. The first month after our confrontation had been the hardest. The phone calls and text messages had continued, escalating from pleading to angry to desperate. Gaia had tried every manipulation tactic in her arsenal. Guilt trips about Byron missing his grandmother, sob stories about unexpected bills, even fake medical emergencies that I might have fallen for 6 months earlier, but now saw right through. I'd blocked every number, ignored every attempt at contact, and slowly the harassment had died down. Apparently, when someone stops responding to manipulation, manipulators eventually move on to easier targets. The only contact I'd maintained was with Byron, and that had taken some careful negotiating. After 2 months of radio silence, Abram had finally called from his work phone, a number I hadn't blocked, to ask if I still wanted to see my grandson. We'd worked out an arrangement. Every other Saturday, Abram would bring Byron to the library downtown, and I'd spend the afternoon with him there. Neutral territory, public space, no opportunity for Gaia to show up and create drama. Those Saturday afternoons had become the brightest spots in my week. Byron, bless his heart, had never asked about the beach house again. I suspected someone had finally explained to him that Grandma's living situation was different than he'd been told, but he'd adapted with the resilience that children possess. We'd read books together, worked on puzzles, and talked about school and soccer and all the normal things that grandmothers and grandsons discuss. He never asked why we didn't meet at his house anymore, never questioned why Mommy didn't come along. Children are remarkably good at accepting new normal when the adults in their lives present it consistently. What Byron did ask about, though, were the changes he could see in me. "Grandma Joy, you seem different," he'd said one Saturday as we worked on a dinosaur puzzle. "Different how, sweetheart? Happier, I think. Like you're not worried about stuff anymore." Out of the mouths of babes, he was right. I wasn't worried anymore. For the first time in years, I was sleeping through the night without anxiety about unexpected phone calls or demands for money I couldn't afford to give. The liberation had extended beyond just the financial relief. I'd started doing things I'd put off for years. I'd joined a book club at the community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was constantly managing the crises in my family's life. I'd started taking watercolor classes at the local college, using money that would have once gone toward someone else's emergency. I'd even made friends. Real friends. Not family members who only called when they needed something. Margaret from the book club had become a regular coffee companion, and Dorothy from my watercolor class had invited me to join her gardening group. For the first time since my husband died 8 years ago, I felt like I had a life that belonged to me. The hardest part had been accepting that I might never have a normal relationship with Abram again. He'd made his choice that day in my apartment, choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's well-being. And I'd had to live with the consequences of that choice. But surprisingly, it had gotten easier as time passed. The initial grief had given way to something calmer, something that felt like acceptance. I'd raised him the best I could, taught him right from wrong, and given him the tools to make good decisions. What he chose to do with those tools as an adult was beyond my control. 3 months ago, I'd received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a check for $500 and a note in Abram's handwriting. "Mom, I know this doesn't make up for everything, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to do better. We both are. I hope someday we can talk again." I'd deposited the check. I wasn't too proud to accept money that was legitimately owed to me, but I hadn't responded to the note. $500 against $60,000 was a gesture, not a solution. And gestures without accountability weren't enough anymore. But it had given me hope that maybe someday, when Abram was ready to take full responsibility for what had happened, we might be able to rebuild something. Not the relationship we'd had before, that was gone forever, but maybe something honest and real. Last week, I'd received another envelope, this one with a return address I recognized. Inside was a hand-drawn picture from Byron showing the two of us at the library, surrounded by books and smiling. On the back, he'd written, "Dear Grandma Joy, I miss seeing you more, but I'm glad you're happy. Love, Byron." That picture was now framed and sitting on my kitchen table, next to the small, succulent plant Dorothy had given me from her garden. Simple things, but they represented something important. A life built on truth instead of manipulation, on genuine affection instead of financial obligation. Yesterday had marked exactly 6 months since that confrontation in the park with Gaia. To celebrate, though that seemed like the wrong word, I'd done something I hadn't been able to afford in years. I'd bought myself a small piece of jewelry, nothing fancy, just a simple silver bracelet with a charm that read strong. As I fastened it around my wrist that morning, I'd thought about everything that had brought me to this point. The lies, the betrayal, the difficult choices, and ultimately, the liberation that came from refusing to be anyone's victim. I was 64 years old, living alone in a small apartment, with a modest income and simple pleasures. By some measures, I'd lost a lot. My relationship with my son, my role as the family benefactor, my illusions about the people I loved most. But I'd gained something more valuable: my dignity. That afternoon, as I sat in my living room reading a book from the library, my phone rang. For a moment, my heart jumped. Old habits die hard. But when I looked at the screen, I saw Margaret's name. "Joyceann, are you free for dinner tonight? Dorothy and I are trying that new Italian place downtown, and we thought you might want to join us." I looked around my quiet apartment, at the life I'd built for myself, and smiled. "I'd love to," I said. And for the first time in years, I meant it completely. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.